Claire parked her car in front of the sprawling, decrepit mansion. The structure loomed against the twilight sky, its gnarled silhouette almost blending with the surrounding woods. The iron gate creaked as she pushed it open, her heart pounding in rhythm with its eerie groans. "Why me?" Claire muttered under her breath, clutching the crumpled letter from her late great-uncle's lawyer. The letter was cryptic. "The house is yours now. But beware, it keeps secrets." Her footsteps echoed on the gravel path leading to the grand double doors. Despite its decay, the mansion carried an air of forlorn majesty. The windows were grimy, reflecting faint glimpses of the dying sun. She took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy door, its hinges screaming in protest. Inside, the air was cold and still, as if time had frozen the moment the house was abandoned. A musty smell greeted her, mingled with something metallic, almost like blood. The grand chandelier overhead, covered in cobwebs, swayed slightly as though disturbed by her presence. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the silence. It was a message from her best friend. Mia, let me know if you need me. That place gives me the creeps." Claire sighed and responded quickly before her courage faltered. "I'll be fine, just settling in." She wandered through the grand foyer, her footsteps muffled by the thick dust carpeting the floor. The walls were lined with faded portraits of people who bore the same sharp cheekbones and piercing eyes as her mother. There was something unsettling about their expressions, though their eyes seemed to follow her, and their lips curled into faint, mocking smiles. Pushing her unease aside, Claire headed upstairs to find a room to settle in. Most of the doors were locked, but she finally found one that creaked open. Inside was a modest bedroom with a four-poster bed and an old wardrobe. She dumped her bags and tried to ignore the feeling of being watched. The first night was restless. Claire tossed and turned, the house groaning around her. At one point, she swore she heard whispering, faint and indecipherable, like someone murmuring just beyond the walls. She bolted upright, her heart racing, but the room was empty. She brushed it off as her imagination, though sleep eluded her for the rest of the night. The next morning, Claire explored more of the house, her curiosity piqued despite her nerves. She discovered a door leading to the basement. The air grew colder as she descended, each step creaking under her weight. At the bottom, the light from her flashlight revealed a space filled with old furniture, cobweb-covered trunks, and something that sent a chill down her spine. A large mirror leaning against the wall, its surface cracked but clean. She approached it cautiously. Something about the mirror drew her in, as though it held secrets she wasn't supposed to see. When she looked into it, her reflection stared back, but something was wrong. The face in the mirror smiled, a crooked, sinister smile that wasn't hers. Claire stumbled back, her heart pounding. The mirror darkened, and for a moment, she saw a shadowy figure standing behind her reflection. She whipped around, but the basement was empty. Grabbing her flashlight, she fled upstairs, her pulse hammering in her ears. As she reached the top, she heard faint laughter, a child's laughter, echoing from below. Later that day, Claire attempted to open one of the locked doors on the second floor. Something about that door felt important, almost magnetic. After some searching, she found an old key in a desk drawer downstairs and tried it on the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a nursery frozen in time. Dust-covered toys littered the floor, and a rocking chair sat eerily in the corner. On the wall, a faded mural depicted a family, a mother, father, and two children, standing in front of the mansion. But as Claire looked closer, she noticed something unnerving. The mother's face had been scratched out, and the father's eyes were painted a deep, unnatural red. She shivered and turned to leave, but the rocking chair began to move on its own, its creaking filling the room. Claire's breath caught in her throat as the faint whispering started again, this time louder and clearer. "Leave," the voice hissed. "Before it's too late." Claire backed out of the room and slammed the door shut, her hands shaking. That evening, Claire discovered a diary in the study, tucked away in a hidden compartment of the desk. The entries were written in a spidery hand, the ink faded but legible. They belonged to a woman named Margaret, the last known resident of the house. Margaret's entries spoke of a darkness that had plagued the house for generations. She wrote of strange occurrences, voices in the walls, shadows that moved on their own, and the feeling of being watched. The final entry sent a chill down Claire's spine. The house demands a sacrifice. I tried to resist, but it's too late now. It's watching me, waiting. To whoever finds this, beware the mirror, and beware the whispers. The house has claimed me, and it will claim you too. That night, the whispers returned, louder than ever. Claire lay frozen in bed as the shadows in her room seemed to stretch and writhe. The air grew heavy, and her breath came in shallow gasps. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Claire sat up, clutching her phone as a makeshift light. A shadow moved across the wall. A tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes and elongated limbs. It seemed to watch her, its head tilting unnaturally. The figure stepped closer, and Claire's scream caught in her throat. She shut her eyes tightly, reciting every comforting mantra she could think of. When she opened them, the figure was gone, but her bedroom door was wide open, revealing the dark hallway beyond. That night, the whispers returned, louder than ever. Claire lay frozen in bed as the shadows in her room seemed to stretch and writhe. The air grew heavy, and her breath came in shallow gasps. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Claire sat up, clutching her phone as a makeshift light. A shadow moved across the wall. A tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes and elongated limbs. It seemed to watch her, its head tilting unnaturally. The figure stepped closer, and Claire's scream caught in her throat. She shut her eyes tightly, reciting every comforting mantra she could think of. When she opened them, the figure was gone, but her bedroom door was wide open, revealing the dark hallway beyond. Determined to confront her fears, Claire decided to explore more of the house in the daylight. Armed with her flashlight and a crowbar for locked doors, she ventured back to the basement. The air grew colder with each step, and the metallic smell she'd noticed before was stronger now. The mirror was still there, leaning against the wall like a sentinel. Its surface was dusty, but the crack running through it gleamed as if freshly struck. Claire approached cautiously, her breath visible in the chilly air. Her reflection looked back at her, pale and wide-eyed. But as she stared, the face in the mirror began to change. The eyes darkened, the mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, and the reflection whispered, "Stay, Claire. Stay with us forever." Claire stumbled backward, tripping over a trunk. The mirror flickered, and for a moment, she saw not her own reflection but a room filled with shadowy figures. Men, women, and children, standing motionless, their faces blurred. The whispers began again, louder this time, echoing off the basement walls. She clamped her hands over her ears, but the voices grew unbearable. "Don't leave us. Help us. Stay." Claire bolted up the stairs, her heart pounding. She slammed the basement door shut and locked it, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Back in the safety of the study, Claire pulled out the diary she'd found. The final entry still sent shivers down her spine, but now, she noticed something she'd overlooked before. A loose piece of paper tucked between the pages. The note was written in the same spidery handwriting as the diary. "The mirror is the key. It holds them all, but it cannot be broken. To destroy it is to release them. To leave it intact is to feed its hunger. Choose wisely, for the house will not let you go until you decide." Claire's stomach churned. The mirror was a prison, and those shadowy figures, those voices, they were trapped inside. That night, as Claire lay in bed, the house seemed quieter than usual. No whispers, no creaks, just an eerie, suffocating silence. She almost allowed herself to relax when a soft scratching sound broke the stillness. It was coming from the hallway outside her room. Claire froze, her ears straining to catch the sound. It was faint at first, like nails dragging across wood, but it grew louder and more insistent. Summoning every ounce of courage, She grabbed her flashlight and opened the door. The hallway was dark, and the scratching stopped the moment the door creaked open. "Hello!" she called out, her voice trembling. A cold breeze swept past her, making her shiver. She swung the flashlight beam down the hall, but it revealed nothing. Just as she turned to retreat, the scratching resumed, this time from the nursery. Claire's heart raced as she approached the locked nursery door. She had shut it tightly earlier, but now it stood ajar, its dark interior beckoning her. Inside, the rocking chair moved slowly back and forth, its creaking filling the room. The mural on the wall had changed. The scratched-out mother's face was now clear, but it was twisted in agony, her mouth open in a silent scream. Claire's flashlight flickered, and the whispers returned. This time they weren't faint. They were loud, urgent, and terrifying. "Get out! You're next! She's coming!" Claire backed out of the room, slamming the door shut behind her. The whispers didn't stop. They followed her down the hall, growing louder and angrier. Claire ran to the study and locked the door behind her. She grabbed her phone and dialed Mia's number, her hands shaking so badly she could barely press the buttons. "Mia," she gasped when her friend answered. "I need you to come here. Something's wrong. Really wrong." Claire, slow down. "What's happening?" Mia sounded alarmed. "The house. It's haunted or cursed or something. I can't do this alone." There was a long pause. Then Mia said, "I'll be there first thing in the morning. Just hang tight. Okay?" Claire nodded, even though Mia couldn't see her. "Okay. Just hurry." After hanging up, Claire noticed something strange. The diary was open on the desk, though she hadn't touched it. A new sentence had appeared beneath the final entry, written in the same spidery handwriting. "She won't make it. Neither will you." The rest of the night passed in a haze of terror. Claire stayed in the study, jumping at every sound and shadow. At one point, she thought she saw a figure standing just outside the window, a tall, gaunt silhouette with hollow eyes. When dawn finally broke, Claire felt a small measure of relief. But as she stared out the window, waiting for Mia's car, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the front yard, carved into the dirt, were 5 words. "You can never leave us." The sunlight streaming through the windows did little to warm Claire's icy fear. She paced the study, her eyes darting to the yard outside where the ominous words were still etched into the dirt. "You can never leave us." Every minute stretched endlessly as she waited for Mia. The idea of being alone in the house for even another second gnawed at her nerves. She clutched her phone tightly, checking for updates. When a car's faint hum finally reached her ears, relief surged through her. Mia arrived, her face a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Claire, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Claire didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed Mia's arm and pulled her inside. "You'll see for yourself." Claire led Mia through the house, recounting everything. The voices, the mirror, the diary, and the mysterious writing. Mia's skepticism faltered as they reached the nursery. The air in the room was suffocating, and the rocking chair moved in slow, deliberate arcs, though no breeze touched it. The mural on the wall had changed again, the mother's figure now fully formed and reaching out toward them with twisted, desperate fingers. "What the hell, Claire?" Mia whispered, backing away. Before Claire could respond, the whispers began anew. This time they weren't alone. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed from the hallway. Both women froze, their eyes wide with terror. "Who's there?" Mia shouted, her voice cracking. The footsteps stopped. Then, slowly, the basement door creaked open. Against their better judgment, the 2 women descended into the basement, the flashlight trembling in Claire's grip. The mirror was where she'd left it, its crack now forming a jagged line that seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. As they approached, the mirror shimmered, and a distorted face pressed against its surface. A woman with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched unnaturally wide. She screamed silently, her hands clawing at the glass as if begging for release. "Claire, what is that?" Mia gasped, gripping her friend's arm. Before Claire could answer, the figure in the mirror spoke. not aloud, but directly into their minds. Its voice was a low, guttural rasp. Set us free, or take our place. The room grew colder, the air thick with a suffocating dread. The diary's warning echoed in Claire's mind. The mirror cannot be broken. To destroy it is to release them. What does it mean? Mia asked, her voice barely audible. I don't know, Claire whispered, but she had a feeling she wasn't being told the whole truth. Suddenly, the mirror's surface darkened, and the room plunged into complete blackness. The flashlight flickered out, leaving them in a void so deep it felt as though the basement had ceased to exist. Then came the sound of breathing deep, rasping breaths that surrounded them. A cold hand brushed against Claire's shoulder. She screamed and spun around, but no one was there. A faint glow began to emanate from the mirror, and in its light, they saw it. A shadowy figure emerging from the glass. It was tall and skeletal, its limbs unnaturally long, and its eyes were voids of endless blackness. The shadow spoke, its voice reverberating through the room. You have brought life to this house once more. You have stirred its hunger. What do you want? Claire demanded, her voice trembling. The shadow tilted its head, as if considering her question. A bargain. Leave one of you behind, and the other may go free. No, Mia shouted, stepping protectively in front of Claire. We're not doing this. The shadow laughed, a sound like bones snapping. You misunderstand. The house has already chosen. In the chaos, Claire remembered the diary in her pocket. She pulled it out, flipping desperately through the pages for answers. She stopped at a passage she hadn't noticed before, the ink shimmering unnaturally. The house feeds on fear, binds itself to those who enter. Only a sacrifice can appease it, a life for a life. Beware the shadow. It lies. Claire's stomach dropped. It's lying, she said aloud. It doesn't want to set anyone free. Mia nodded, her resolve hardening. Then we fight. The shadow began to advance, its elongated arms stretching toward them. Claire grabbed the mirror, its surface freezing to the touch, and lifted it with all her strength. If I can't break it, she thought, maybe I can trap it again. Help me! Claire shouted to Mia, who quickly joined her. Together, they tilted the mirror toward the shadow. Its glow intensified, and the shadow froze, its movements suddenly sluggish. The whispers turned to screams, filling the room with a deafening cacophony. The shadow's form began to distort, its edges dissolving like smoke. The figures trapped in the mirror appeared again, their faces contorted in agony. Don't, one of them cried. You don't understand. But it was too late. The mirror's light engulfed the shadow, pulling it back into its depths. The house shook violently, the walls groaning as if in protest. Then, all at once, everything went still. Claire and Mia stood in stunned silence, their breaths ragged. The mirror lay on the ground, its surface now smooth and unbroken, as if nothing had ever happened. Did we win? Mia asked, her voice hollow. Claire didn't answer. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As they climbed back upstairs, the house seemed different, quieter, lighter. But the ominous presence lingered, like a bad dream that refuses to fade. When they reached the front door, Claire tried the handle. Turned easily, and the door swung open. Outside, the yard was empty. The words in the dirt were gone. For the first time in days, Claire felt hope. But as they stepped onto the porch, a familiar voice whispered from behind them. You chose poorly. Claire spun around, but the door slammed shut before she could see inside. The house stood silent and still, its secrets locked away once more. Or so they thought. The house loomed behind them as Claire and Mia drove away, its dark windows watching like unblinking eyes. They barely spoke on the ride back to Mia's apartment, the events of the last few days weighing heavily on their minds. When they arrived, Claire collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Do you think it's over? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mia shook her head. I don't know. That voice at the end. It felt like a warning. Claire nodded, dread tightening her chest. Deep down, she knew the house wasn't done with them. The next morning, Claire woke to find her arm burning. Rolling up her sleeve, she discovered a strange mark etched into her skin. A circular symbol with jagged edges, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. She rushed to the bathroom, scrubbing at it furiously, but it wouldn't fade. When Mia saw it, her face turned pale. That wasn't there before. It looks ancient, like something out of a ritual. It's from the house, Claire said, her voice trembling. It marked me. Before Mia could respond, Claire's phone buzzed. She hesitated before picking it up, her heart sinking when she saw the caller ID. Unknown. Don't answer it, Mia urged. But something compelled Claire to press accept. Static crackled on the other end, followed by a voice. A low, guttural whisper. You belong to us now. The call ended abruptly, leaving Claire clutching the phone with trembling hands. Determined to find answers, Claire and Mia returned to the library where Claire had first found the diary. Hours of searching revealed little about the house, but Claire stumbled upon an old book on occult practices. Flipping through its yellowed pages, she stopped at an illustration of the symbol on her arm. It's a binding mark, Claire read aloud. Used to tether a soul to an object or place. Her voice caught in her throat. The house. It's trying to keep me. Before Mia could respond, her phone buzzed with a notification. Claire. You need to see this. Mia handed Claire her phone. A video had been uploaded to Claire's YouTube channel, one she hadn't made. The thumbnail was the mirror from the basement, its surface glowing faintly. Against her better judgment, Claire clicked on it. The screen filled with static before showing a distorted image of the nursery. The mural had changed again, now depicting a young woman. Claire, standing in front of the mirror, her face frozen in terror. Then came the whisper. Return to us. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, Claire and Mia decided to return to the house. They couldn't let the curse fester any longer. Armed with salt, candles, and other items they'd hastily gathered from occult forums, they approached the house under the cover of darkness. Inside, the air was colder than before, the silence oppressive. They made their way to the basement, where the mirror stood as if waiting for them. This time, the figures trapped inside were clearer, their faces filled with anguish. Claire placed the items in a circle around the mirror, following instructions she'd found in the book. This is supposed to sever the connection, she explained. But as she lit the candles, the house began to shudder. The whispers grew louder, morphing into guttural screams. The figures in the mirror pressed against the glass, their mouths moving in unison. Stop her! Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled like water, and the shadowy figure from before emerged, its skeletal frame towering over them. You cannot break the bond, it hissed. Only death can end it. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, Claire and Mia decided to return to the house. They couldn't let the curse fester any longer. Armed with salt, candles, and other items they'd hastily gathered from occult forums, they approached the house under the cover of darkness. Inside, the air was colder than before, the silence oppressive. They made their way to the basement, where the mirror stood as if waiting for them. This time, the figures trapped inside were clearer, their faces filled with anguish. Claire placed the items in a circle around the mirror, following instructions she'd found in the book. This is supposed to sever the connection, she explained. But as she lit the candles, the house began to shudder. The whispers grew louder, morphing into guttural screams. The figures in the mirror pressed against the glass, their mouths moving in unison. Stop her! Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled like water, and the shadowy figure from before emerged, its skeletal frame towering over them. You cannot break the bond, it hissed. Only death can end it. The shadow lunged toward Claire, but Mia threw a handful of salt at it. The creature recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. Keep going, Mia shouted, grabbing another handful of salt. Claire chanted the incantation from the book, her voice shaking. The mirror's glow intensified, and the shadow screamed, its form distorting. But just as it seemed they were winning, the shadow turned its hollow eyes on Mia. If you won't stop, I'll take her instead. Before Mia could react, the shadow surged forward, wrapping its tendrils around her. Claire screamed, grabbing the mirror in desperation. Let her go! The mirror's surface cracked again, and the shadow froze. The figures inside began to wail, their voices blending into a haunting symphony. Don't break it, one of them cried. If you do, it will consume everything. Claire hesitated, torn between saving Mia and heeding the warning. But when Mia's face began to pale, her strength fading, Claire made her decision. She smashed the mirror against the ground. The impact sent a shockwave through the room. The shadow let out a final, ear-splitting scream before disintegrating into smoke. The figures in the mirror vanished, their cries fading into silence. Mia collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. Did it work? She asked weakly. Claire looked around. The room was still, the oppressive presence gone. But as relief began to wash over her, she noticed something horrifying. The mark on her arm was glowing brighter than ever, its pulse quickening. The whispers returned, softer this time but unmistakable. You can never leave. As they climbed out of the basement, the house seemed to have changed. The walls were no longer cracked, the air no longer cold. It looked new. Claire, Mia said, her voice trembling. I think we're still inside. Claire turned to see what Mia was pointing at. The front door. It was open, but beyond it was not the yard. It was the nursery, its mural now depicting both of them standing in the basement, the shadow looming behind them. The house had claimed them. Claire and Mia stood frozen, staring at the impossible sight before them. The open door led not to the outside world, but back into the house itself. It was as if the house had folded in on itself, trapping them in an endless loop. Mia's voice trembled. Claire, what if we're already dead? Claire shook her head, refusing to believe it. No, we're not dead. This is just another trick. The house is trying to break us, but deep down doubt gnawed at her. The glowing mark on her arm was a constant reminder of her connection to the house. And the whispers, softer now, seemed to follow her every move. Determined to find a way out, they decided to explore the house again. But as they moved from room to room, something chilling became clear. The house was shifting. Corridors stretched endlessly. Doors led to rooms they'd never seen before, and the air grew heavier with each step. In one room, they found a crib surrounded by toys that seemed freshly polished. The mural on the wall depicted a family, a mother, father, and child. But the faces of the parents were scratched out, leaving only the child smiling eerily. It's playing with us, Claire said. It wants us to feel its pain. Mia picked up a rattle from the crib. Pain? Or revenge? The moment she said the word, the walls groaned, and the house seemed to shudder in anger. They stumbled into a study that looked untouched by time. On the desk lay an old leather-bound journal. Claire opened it, recognizing the handwriting immediately. It was the same as the diary she'd found in the library. This one, however, seemed unfinished. The entries revealed a horrifying truth. The house had once belonged to a man named Elias Crowther, who had been obsessed with immortality. He had performed dark rituals, binding his soul to the house so he could live forever. But the ritual had gone wrong, trapping not only his soul but the souls of anyone who entered the house. One passage stood out. To break the bond, the house must consume a willing sacrifice. Only then can the cycle end. Claire dropped the book, her blood running cold. A sacrifice? That's why it marked me. Mia grabbed her arm. No, we're not doing that. We'll find another way. But the look in Claire's eyes was distant, as if the house was already calling her. As they descended deeper into the house, they found themselves in a cavernous room lit by flickering torches. In the center was an altar surrounded by ancient symbols, the same mark that glowed on Claire's arm. The whispers grew louder, forming words. Give yourself and she will be free. Claire turned to Mia, her voice trembling. It's me it wants. If I stay, you can leave. Mia shook her head violently. No, you don't know if it's telling the truth. It's lied to us before. Claire stepped toward the altar, tears streaming down her face. Mia, you have a life to go back to. I don't. If this is the only way to end it. Before she could finish, the shadow appeared again, its form more solid than ever. You will not choose, it hissed. I will. The shadow lunged at Mia, its tendrils wrapping around her throat. Claire screamed, grabbing a torch from the wall and swinging it at the creature. The flames seared through its form, and it let out a deafening shriek. Run, Mia, Claire shouted. But Mia didn't move. Instead, she grabbed the book they had found earlier, flipping to the final page. There was a chant, a counter-ritual that might sever the house's power. Without hesitation, she began to recite the words. The house roared in fury, its walls trembling violently. The shadow turned its attention to Mia, surging toward her like a tidal wave. Claire stepped between them, holding the torch high. You want me? Take me. The shadow paused, its hollow eyes locking onto her. Your soul is mine. Mia continued the chant, her voice growing louder despite the chaos around her. The symbols on the altar began to glow, and the shadow recoiled, its form flickering. No, it screamed. You cannot undo what is eternal. With a final burst of energy, the shadow lunged at Claire. She didn't flinch, bracing herself for the impact. But just as it reached her, the symbols on the altar erupted in a blinding light, engulfing the entire room. When the light faded, the shadow was gone. The room was silent, the oppressive presence lifted. Claire and Mia looked at each other, their breathing heavy. Did it work? Claire asked. Before Mia could answer, the walls began to crumble. The house was collapsing in on itself. Run! Mia shouted, grabbing Claire's hand. They sprinted through the shifting corridors, dodging falling debris. The front door came into view, glowing faintly. As they reached it, Claire felt a pull on her arm. The mark was burning brighter than ever. It's not letting me go, she cried. Mia grabbed her other hand, pulling with all her strength. You're not staying here. With a final effort, they burst through the door and into the cold night air. The house collapsed behind them, imploding into nothingness. Claire looked at her arm. The mark was gone. The whispers had finally ceased. She and Mia stood in silence, the weight of what they'd endured settling over them. Do you think it's really over? Mia asked. Claire didn't answer. She couldn't shake the feeling that a part of the house still lingered within her. As they walked away, a faint glow flickered in the rubble. A shard of the mirror, pulsing softly like a heartbeat.